staff and everyone gathered here today. I see most of my colleagues are not there except Prof. Shai, Mr. Mboweni, Prof. Twala, and others. I really need to appreciate Professor More for what he has done. And again for choosing his alma mater, the University of Limpopo, for his book launch. You know, he has written quite a number of books. And Professor More, wherever you are, I'm sure I will get a complimentary copy. At this age, we no longer afford to pay for books. I also have to thank you, Professor, for immortalizing one of our own, an iconic alumni of the University of Limpopo and former Vice-Chancellor and Principal, Professor Noel Chabane Manganyi. You know, being one of the country's foremost clinical psychologists and thinkers, Prof. Manganyi has earned his place in history. His contribution to scholarship has impressively straddled psychology and philosophy. His books and other writings never shied away from confronting the material issues of the day, giving context to scholarship and social services. One can only be proud to be counted amongst these successors as Vice-Chancellor and Principal of this great institution of ours. Professor More, your decision to give prominence to someone who has not enjoyed as much adulation as he deserves is a commendable gesture. It adds a vital page to the storybook of the University of Limpopo, storybook of social sciences, of South Africa, and of the continent as a whole. By documenting the story of Professor Manganyi and by highlighting his accomplishments, you are drawing the attention of our students and everyone to the rich history of our institution. You are setting the tone for the celebration of our 65th anniversary as University of Limpopo, 30 years of democratic rule in South Africa, and the 50th anniversary of the assassination of one of our former students of this university, Abraham Onkhupose-Tiro, and the 60th anniversary of the Rivonia trial where former Chancellor of this university, Dr. Nelson Mandela, was in the dock. I also must appreciate our students and staff for collaborating with you in putting this auspicious event together. I trust that the book and this event will open a new vista for our students, for our staff, and for humanity in general. Ladies and gentlemen, it's a great pleasure, great honor for me to once again welcome you all to this function where we will be celebrating our own, and I can only wish you well. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you very much, Prof. So guys, you have been officially welcome. And those that are also joining us from our online platform, you are welcome. Our VC has just welcomed us all. Indeed, this intellectual festival, this festival of ideas, wouldn't have been possible without those that come before us, particularly Professor Manganyi. We know that at this point, the whole country is talking about the decolonization of knowledge, is talking about black existential thought, and it is quite inspiring to draw from our rich intellectual heritage to commemorate one of our own as a way of looking forward. So the official book launch shall begin officially at 11:30. At this point, we do have a keynote by Professor Twala as part of this 30th anniversary conference of the transition to democracy. We witnessed the keynote yesterday, Professor Chris Malikane, who touched on many issues socio-economic about the 30 years and also the long durée of inequality in the country. And today we've got Professor Twala to factor in the historical and socio-political issues of the day. And this is, part of our reclaiming of the, of our intellectual heritage. I believe, there was a time where, we were leading, we are still leading in thought, and commemorating Manganyi having this conference speaks to us reclaiming that glory. So without any further ado, I'd like to call upon Dr. Lakin, who will introduce Professor Twala, who will then give us the keynote, which will be followed by a response. Dr. Lakin, the floor is yours.
Good morning, everyone, and welcome to Professor Mokalong, our colleagues, our students. My job is very simple. I just need to introduce Professor Twala. Now, Professor Twala is Professor of History in the Department of Cultural and Political Studies, and before the department was fortunate enough in securing Prof. Twala's services, taking up the chair in history. Prof. Twala was Associate Professor of History at the University of Free State, as well as the Vice Dean of the Faculty of Humanities. Now, Prof. Twala holds a PhD in history, and he's got a substantial research record, particularly focusing on the liberation movement. He's authored 8 chapters in the South African Democracy Education Trust, the Road to Democracy in South Africa, Volume 4. He's the recipient of a number of research awards, grants from the Mellon Foundation and the National Institute of Humanities and Social Sciences. He's been awarded visiting research and research fellowships at Harvard University, the University of California, Los Angeles in the United States, and at the Kwame Nkrumah Institute of African Studies at the University of Ghana in Accra. I think there's a lot more that could be said about Prof. Twala, but at this point, I'll hand the mic over to Prof. Twala. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Lakin. Good morning, colleagues, and good morning to those who are joining us online. In most cases, people know about their lives when it is on the obituary. And I am fortunate enough to listen to what Dr. Lakin said today. I was not aware that the VC is also a historian by taking us to the history of the institution and those who came before him. I think that is commendable, that in whatever we are doing, history is always there whether you like it or not. By virtue that you know your birth date, where you were born, that is part and parcel of history. You can't divorce yourself from history. I prepared a PowerPoint presentation, but because I saw yesterday no one used a PowerPoint, I decided also not to use one, because I've seen people using PowerPoint presentations, but without any power in the presentations that they are making. Therefore, I decided not to go that route. Indeed, Sékou Touré, who was the president of Guinea, was correct when indicating, I quote, "To take part in the African Revolution, it is not enough to write a revolutionary song. You must fashion the revolution with the people. And if we fashion it with the people, the song will come by themselves." I think what we are doing today as the University of Limpopo, we are embarking on a revolution. And then when we talk about a revolution in historical context, we are talking about a great change, whereby students are given platform to engage on a scholarly level and then also to air their ideas. To talk about the history of South Africa in a 30-year period, it is not an easy task. It is complex because our history, it is a controversial history, and our history, it is a power-mongering kind of history, and our history also overlooked some of the political actors in the liberation of this country. Therefore, you must also pardon me that I will indicate that history has no blank spaces. And this reminds me of one president of this country who once said, when you read a history book and you come across pages in the history book that you don't like, you don't tear those pages and throw them away because you don't like them. Therefore, the history of this country, whether you like it or you don't, but you are part and parcel of the history of this country. From the euphoria of the first democratic elections to the realities of today, the path traversed has been one of triumphs and tribulations, progress and setbacks. The promise of democracy brought hope for a brighter, more inclusive future. In 1994, South Africa's population stood at approximately 40 million people. Fast forward to 2024, and the population has grown significantly, with estimating 82 or 62 million, according to the census 2021. As South Africa celebrates this as significant milestone, it's crucial to engage in introspection. Despite notable progress, the nation continues to grapple with enduring challenges. Economic inequality looms large, perpetuating the marginalization of millions who remains excluded from the fruits of economic growth. I remember in 1994, I voted on the 26th of April on a special vote because I was participating on the 27th. And I still remember I voted 4 minutes past 10 in the morning because I had to make a record of that. Fast tracking that 30 years later, I still vividly remember the queues, people upbeat going to vote. But because we are looking at the history of that particular event, we must not forget that history is about our past politics, and our past politics is our present history. That is why today we are engaging. But when we engage about what happened in 1994, we must not fall into a trap of many historians whereby they go to an extent of romanticizing history. According to Terence Ranger, we need to be patriotic as South Africans about our past, whether we like it or not. But at the same time, we need to build a nation. And history is one of the disciplines that can bring that social cohesion. I usually ask my students, the second years, they know, when I start with my sessions, I said this year, are we embarking on African history, or are we embarking on the history of Africa? Because there is a difference. Are we today talking about South African history, or are we talking about the history of South Africa? I will leave that as a homework for you, and then you can give me answers 30 years from now when we go to 60 years. It is important for us also to understand that history has got different angles. And then the history that we are talking about here of 30 years of democracy, it is what we call political history. Perhaps we need to pause and ask ourselves critical question and say, did we in 1994 gain democracy or we gained freedom? Did we gain democracy or we gained freedom? And it is important also for us to understand that when we move forward and then when we lament about the past 30 years, are we lamenting based on having achieved this freedom or having achieved democracy? And then when we move forward, unpacking this 30-year journey of history, we need also to understand the difference between history and history. To understand the difference between history and history. History with a capital letter H and history with a small letter h. And then unless we understand that, it will be difficult for us to unpack the trajectory for our 30 years in democracy. On the 22nd of April 2024, I was interviewed by SAFM, and the question was, does teaching history open or heal a nation's wound? It was an hour interview with two other colleagues from other institutions. I said to them, it depends where you are standing looking at this kind of history. If you are looking at history using your white spectacles, therefore you will see history in the whiteness. And if you are looking at history using your black spectacles, then you are going to see history in black. Therefore, it depends on your interpretation of history and what is that you think it is important in history. When I was given this task to come and talk about the 30 years of democracy, I said to myself, the biggest mistake that we make, and also yesterday while I was listening, we want to think about the past using our present lenses. And that is the problem. And then I was seated there yesterday and I was asking myself a question. Would you have done things differently 30 years ago? Because we've got now the luxury of reflecting 30 years. But those people who were there 30 years ago had to take a decision because the country was on fire. Therefore, it is important that when you look back, but we also use your back spectacles in order to situate yourself into that particular position. And that is important. The country was having instability. After 1990, after the unbanning, I remember vividly on the 2nd of February 1990, when F.W. de Klerk announced, I was glued next to the TV because we were told that here comes a big announcement. And then we got the announcement. And then after the announcement, the country was also on fire because of the differences and instability. Therefore, we need also to appreciate the role played by those people then in order to quell the violence that was engulfing the country. I studied in Pietermaritzburg. I know what was the life in Pietermaritzburg in the mid-80s. Therefore, those are the things that we need to appreciate when we criticize. But when we criticize, we must also criticize and have some inputs. The danger of the South African population is that we are good in criticizing, but we are bad in writing our stories. Therefore, when I was tasked to talk here, I asked myself, where do I start? Do I start with the land dispossessions of the 1800s? Do I start with the so-called Anglo-Boer War, the South African War of 1899 to 1902? Do I start with the formation of the then South African Native National Congress of 1912, which turned to be the African National Congress in 1923? Do I start with the formation of the Union of South Africa in 1910? Do I start with the formation of the National Party in 1914? Do I start with 1923, the involvement of the then South African Communist Party in the politics of South Africa, and not the then Communist Party of South Africa, not the South African Communist Party of today? Do I start with the 1913 and the 1936 Land Act, because people today are lamenting about the issue of land? Do I start with the 1944 Conference of the Youth League, the Anton Lembetes of this world? Do I move forward to the 1950s, the 1952 June Defiance Campaign? Or do I go to as far as the Kliptown meeting of the adoption of the Freedom Charter in 1955? Or do I move forward to the 9th of August in 1956? Or do I move to April 1959 with the formation of the Pan-Africanist Congress? Or do I move to the 1960s with the burning of the liberation movements? Or do I go further, the 1960s, and go to the late 1960s with the formation of the Black Consciousness Movement? Or do I cross to the 1970s and start there with the 1970s and look at the Inkatha freedom, the Inkatha Nkululeko Sizwe in 1975? Or do I jump and start with the 1976 student uprising? Or do I continue and go to 1977, 1978, the formation of AZAPO? Or do I go to the early 1980s and look at the formation of the United Democratic Front in 1983? Or do I go to 1985 and look at the formation of COSATU? Or do I go to the period of the 1980s, which was called the period of ungovernability in South Africa, as stated by O.R. Tambo? Or do I go and enter into the 1989, whereby the first people who were coming from exile into South Africa? Do I go to the 2nd of February 1990, talking about the unbanning of the liberation movements and the release of the political prisoners? Do I go to what we call the talks about the talks in South Africa? And then do I go to the Congress of Democratic South Africa, CODESA 1? Or do I start with CODESA 2? Do I go to 1994 and start my talk with the April 1994 elections? I am giving you that piece in order to understand that the April 1994 elections was a culmination of a lot of what happened before then. Somebody yesterday talked about O.R. Tambo in exile, but being in London. But it did not give us the context. And that is the problem of selective history. But the person did not tell us about O.R. Tambo having a house in Zambia also and staying in Zambia. Somebody yesterday told us about the infiltration of the ANC. But the person did not tell us about the infiltration of the National Party then by the liberation movement. I interviewed people who came from exile. And one person whom I interviewed who came from Tanzania said to me, any stamp or passport that South Africa introduced when they were still in exile, they will have it also in exile. The stamp and the passports. And the South African government couldn't get hold of them. And those are the things that we need to understand as historians. And somebody yesterday talked about Nelson Mandela meeting with the National Party as early as 1985. Yes, there is a text I want to quote about the negotiations. It says, in reality, the negotiating process was well on its way as government officials were in regular conversation with Nelson Mandela. Already in November 1985, when Mandela was admitted to the Falls Hospital for an operation, he was visited by H.J. Coetzee, the Minister of Justice. And other people say that was the beginning of the negotiations. And then that is the kind of history. When I tell my students, I say, there is what we call written history, and there is what we call unwritten history. But that is history. Coming back home to the 26th to the 28th of April 1994, I wrote an article some years ago, and the title of the article was referring to the 1994 elections. The title was, "This was no election, it was a census." The IEC declaration of the April 1994 general elections as free and fair in South Africa. A process, a complex process. I got some pushback from people who wanted me to pre-sing what happened in 1994 during the elections. The IEC, as a starter, did excellently well. But there were irregularities in 1994 during the elections. There was a group which was teaching people about how to vote in 1994. And I remember I visited some rural areas in KZN. And then people were saying to those people, if you've got a pen in your ballot, and then to indicate that you don't want this political party, put a cross next to it. There were ballots which were found stacked with the same cross in a box of more than 1,000 ballots in a box. The same pen, the same cross. In no way that people could have decided to put the mark the same way using the red pen. Therefore, we need to do that introspection. And then today we are talking about the campaigns of the political parties we are heading for the elections. There were campaigns in 1994. The slogan of the National Party in 1994 was the party of peace, the party of prosperity, the party for you. And an F.W. de Klerk is recorded to have said there is another bull in the political arena, referring to the ANC. The ANC's slogan in 1994 was a better life for all, working together for jobs, peace, and freedom. I think it is ringing some bells to us 30 years later that we are still saying a better life for all, and then we are working together for jobs. Maibuye, the mouthpiece of the ANC then, stated the following about the National Party. It said, the National Party and others in white establishment face an uphill battle, transforming images and mindsets that are to all intents and purposes lily white. They have to reach out to blacks without whom they face the prospects of marginalization, yet they do have credible policies to address the plight of the oppressed. The ANC has a natural edge over all these parties, for what is unfolding is a result of people's struggles, the realization and their demands and aspirations. Therefore, when you look at what the political parties were saying in 1994, 30 years down the line, we are still hearing the same slogans. But fast track it and look at the election results of 1994. The ANC got 62.65%, and then that translated to 252 seats in the National Assembly as a majority party. The National Party got 20.31% with 82 seats. The IFP got 40.54% with 43 seats. The Freedom Front got 2.17% with 9 seats. The Democratic Party, not the Democratic Alliance, the Democratic Party got 1.73% with 7 seats. The PAC got 1.25% with 5 seats. The ACDP got 0.45% with 2 seats. And then that shows that the people had hope in 1994 and then decided to put the government in the driving seat. But a big but for that matter is what happened after 1994. Nkrumah, the first president of an independent Ghana, when Ghana got independence in 1957 and changed also its name from being the Gold Coast to become Ghana, Nkrumah indicated, I quote, "The independence of Ghana is meaningless until it is linked to the total liberation of Africa." Africa was then liberated, and then the question is, what happened to the liberation of Africa? The ANC issued out a document which was called the ANC Ready to Govern. The million-dollar question is, was the ANC ready to govern in 1994? The ANC issued another document which was called Through the Eyes of the Needle, whereby the leadership, people who were going to take the leadership were to be scrutinized. Is that still happening even today? That is a million-dollar question. The promises were made and the citizenry was hopeful. And then I think the promises should be fulfilled. And then there was this euphoria in 1994, which one will call the Mandelaization of the politics of South Africa, whereby Mandela was the key figure. And what happened after Mandela? And then what happened after the second 5 years of democracy? And then in South Africa, perhaps one other issue or a mistake was the embracing of this rainbowism, a rainbow nation. Are we a rainbow nation, or are we far from being a rainbow nation? And the challenge that the government of the day was faced with was also to incorporate the leadership of the Bantustans, and that was a challenge. I can go on and on and on and on, but the question that we are asking ourselves today, what went wrong? We did not learn from other African countries. We did not. We claimed to be a small Europe in Africa, to an extent that when you get people, they will tell you that I am from Africa, forgetting that we are in Africa also. You hear people say, Bafana Bafana, Ibapala ko Africa. Where are you? You are even worse because your country does not even have a name. It is even worse, it is called South Africa because it is a southern part of Africa. That is not a name. You better call it the Twala land. The constantly held view of dedicating freedom and liberation to one political party, that is another problem. As if others were subsidiary to that one. And then maybe another problem, we forgot everything in 1990, 1994 and concentrated on peace and reconciliation, which is biting us today. Forgotten service delivery, the infighting in the leadership structures of our political organization. Perhaps the biggest problem today, it is the monetarization of politics in South Africa. The politics of money and the politics of the stomach. And the biggest challenge is that students are de-radicalized. And being de-radicalized, you are not a mirror of what was happening at the University of Limpopo, then the University of the North in the 1970s. And then what needs to be done as I conclude? I titled my conclusion, The Conclusion That Does Not Conclude, because I'm not going to conclude. What needs to be done? I don't have answers. Thank you.
Siyabonga kakhulu, Bab Twala. I usually don't call him Professor Twala because, I mean, these titles, I don't know where they come from, but siyabonga kakhulu. Can we please give him a round of applause? Well, he said a mouthful. You know, there's a lot of dates that he mentioned. I mean, as he was mentioning the dates, I was just interested in you know, our 60 years as an institution, right? I mean, just from like the 65 years, I'm meant to say, and the 50th commemoration of the death of Onkgopotse Tiro. I mean, we can talk about the 1969 SASO conference, which was held here on campus, and you know, we can talk about the activism of Tiro igniting the fire, you know, the Soweto revolt. But as a student of philosophy and a teacher, I couldn't help but think that, you know, feminist theory teaches that history is his story and not her story and not our story. I mean, there's another, you know, African adage that the history is always written by winners, that, you know, until lions have their own historians, you know, the tales of the hunt will always glorify the hunter. And Prof. Twala did speak about the different lenses that we need to use in accounting for historical reality. This is to say that history is not a, you know, an absolute science, which we can say this is how things were. However, you know, it is itself not the past, but an attempted reconstruction of the past, right? You know, a reflection of what was happening. And feminist, you know, philosophy is telling us that this is a past written from the perspective of the males, right? So in the 70s, late 60s, with the rise of the feminist movement, there was this conscientization that actually the views of men, you know, dominate the writing of not only of history, but also of knowledge production. So I think this is just a challenge to Prof. Twala as a historian to really maybe reflect on whether history is, you know, her story. But without any further ado, I would like to invite Ms. Anati Koko, who is a lecturer of sociology in the Department of Sociology and Anthropology, who is going to be giving a response to Prof. Twala's presentation. Can we please give her a round of applause?
Greetings to the House at large. Firstly, I would like to greet our Vice Chancellor, Prof. We are very honored to have you here. And I would like to greet my colleagues and students and attendees online. Mine is to respond on the keynote address from Prof. Twala. I must say, I was like, hey, when Mr. Mankhero asked me, I was like, hey, Mr. Mankhero, I'm not a historian. But Prof. Twala just mentioned the fact that you remember your birth date, it means you are a historian. The fact that there are parts of your life that you remember, be it the good and the bad, it means you are a historian. And he also mentions that when you read a book and you find that there are parts of the book that you don't want, or you don't like, don't throw them, don't tear them, because it's history. You won't change anything about that. I'm very much privileged to hear about the history of South Africa. One, I didn't do history. We only get to learn history, more especially the born frees, from the media, from engagements like this, where you get to know what really happened in the past. But the important thing is that you have to reflect and ask yourself, would you have, before you crash and everything that has happened, it's very important that you reflect and you think, what would you have done differently if you were there? And also it is important to look at where we are now as a country. Back in the day, we are coming from previously disadvantaged schools and rural areas. We have been in situations whereby there is no access to resources that are enough in schools. We learnt a lot, but we should be thankful for the fact that things changed. We are here now. We managed to go to school. After 1994, we were able to attend schools in upper classes. We are able to go to higher institutions. We have bursaries. We became the first graduates in our families. It is important to look back and to say, even though things are still not distributed equally, but there has been a progress. And also there is always a room for improvement. We are here, we are looking back from the history, we are reflecting, and we are the leaders of tomorrow. What can we do better to improve the situation? We should give ourselves some tasks. What I don't like this, and then what am I going to do about it? And also, as much as but today we are looking back into the history, it is much more important to look into the future. There are SDGs that aim to transform, to end and reduce poverty in 2030. It's 30 years now from 1994, and we are 6 years to 2030. What can we do to make sure that we reduce poverty, we end inequalities, we are in the institution of higher learning. Students that are here are yet to be the leaders of these institutions and in the political parties. What is your aim? What are you going to change? What are you going to improve? We mess up at times, but we go back to the drawing board to see what is my aim, what is my goal, what is driving me. So basically, I'm very thankful to learn a lot about the history of South Africa, and yet I'm very much interested into seeing what is going to happen this year, 28th or 29th of May? 29th of May. If we have so much anger to our government, what are we going to do on the 29th of May? Let's try to improve and do better. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Sis Anati. Can we please give her another round of applause? So we are privileged, to have the whole history unit of the Department of Cultural and Political Studies just on stage. So we're just going to exploit, this opportunity, which is a rare one, to have historians lined up like this on stage. So we are going to call Dr. Vuma and Dr. Lakin to just give a bite, just to bite on what Prof. Twala has said, and then we shall be opening it to the floor for Q&A. So we'll start with Dr. Vuma, then we'll be followed by Dr. Lakin. Let's give him a round of applause as he asks.
Thank you very much, Program Director. Greetings all once again. Thanks, Professor Twala, for your insightful presentation. In your presentation, you have asked a question that what went wrong, especially from 1994 till date. 30 years in democracy, we are still faced with a plethora of challenges. But Prof, if you can check, most of the challenges that we are confronted with in the country are economic problems or economic challenges. And you'll ask yourself why. It's because of the misconception that apartheid was defeated, which is not true. We are a product of negotiated settlement. And when you negotiate, you give and you take. And in our case, as blacks, during the negotiations, we're able to take political power, and the economic power remain in the hands of the white minority. And that's why today when you check most of our problem, the poverty is an economic problem. The crime that we are faced with in the country is an economic problem. The power supply that we are faced with is an economic problem. And unemployment, yes, like I've already indicated that most of the challenges that we are confronted with in the country are economic problems. But you also asked the question that in your conclusion that what must be done? What must be done is that we need to enter into a second phase of our struggle, because our first phase of our struggle, it was a struggle for political power. And we do have political power, but we don't have economic power. The economies, the means of production are still in the hands of the white minority. And politics and economy, they goes hand in hand. If you have political power, but you don't have economic power, then there are so many things that you can't transform. So in this case, in answering your question on what must be done, we need to enter into a second phase of our struggle, which is the struggle for economic emancipation. And this is going to be the most difficult struggle, because the little comfort that we have today, most of you are not willing to lose it, because this is going to be the most brutal struggle in our country. Thank you very much.
morning again. Mr. Dladla has really put me on the spot, and I'm going to remember that. So I was asked to respond while I was sitting here. Okay, Prof. Twala was saying what he was doing on the 2nd of February 1990. Well, I will remember what I was doing on the 2nd of February 1990. It was the opening of Parliament in Cape Town. There was a big UDF march through Cape Town. The ANC, of course, was unbanned, but a huge flag of the ANC was thrown over Queen Victoria and Louis Botha, decolonizing Parliament. And then people marched, we all marched to the Grand Parade, and it came over, someone sent a message, the ANC, the PAC, the Communist Party have been unbanned. And there was this absolute silence. No one could believe it, because I don't think anyone was expecting it. And then, of course, 9 days later, Nelson Mandela was released. I was on the Grand Parade, and it really seemed like the end of apartheid was coming. But it wasn't. Prof. Twala has focused on the historical background, the events that led up to 1994, that happened before 1994, and then the context of the election itself. Now, you know, in the period up to the unbanning of the liberation movements, it was an ungovernable time. There'd been state of emergencies. More than 100,000 people had been detained without trial. KZN was burning. There was a war going on between the UDF and the IFP. The IFP was not going to have anything to do with a new government. It wanted a federal system. Didn't want to have a unitary state, one person, one vote. There was the Bantustan leaders, many of them didn't want a unitary state. White people on the whole, probably I would say 97% of them, there was no way they were going to accept one person, one vote in a unitary South Africa. The police force completely controlled by the state, the army, the civil service, everything. It was white power. And as I said, large parts of the country were burning. Other than, you know, KZN, large parts of the townships, there was what was called black-on-black violence, which was actually instigated, funded by a third force within, from the top of the government, from the Security Council, etc., dividing the population of South Africa, ensuring that there was not going to be a unitary state. Okay, so Cadessa takes place. What happens? The AWB under Eugene Terreblanche, storms Cadessa. What do we see in the Bantustans? The AWB, along with Bophuthatswana, don't want an integrated South Africa. So we've got the Battle of Bophuthatswana. White people march into Bophuthatswana. The IFP, Buthelezi teams up with generals in the South African Defence Force. There's no way that the IFP is going to agree to a unitary South Africa. And of course, Chris Hani gets killed. We don't even know what happened actually, who was behind it. But definitely there was third force elements too. So the country was totally divided. And we have to remember as well that no minority ever gives up power voluntarily. South Africa is an exception in that case. So negotiations, start again after Chris Hani's been assassinated. This was a kind of turning point, forcing the National Party, to go forward. And the National Party, under no circumstances, is going to allow one person, one vote in a unitary South Africa. It wanted some kind of federal system, some kind of power system, some kind of system where minority rights, white rights, would actually still be entrenched and dominant. And so it came to our president, Cyril Ramaphosa, the negotiator for the ANC, and Rolf Meyer for the National Party, to hammer out some kind of interim constitution. But the sticking point was one person, one vote, and a unitary South Africa. And eventually, at some point, the National Party caved in. Rolf Meyer caved in, and we had a constitution ready and a date set for an election in April 1994. And, you know, it was a very short period of time. The IFP still says they're not going to be part of the election. The IFP entered very, very late with a huge favor delivered to KZN. Most of the former KwaZulu Bantustan was incorporated into a trust under the control of the trust, and that land is not actually, people living there are not free. So eventually the IFP does join the election, and Buthelezzi's face, the IFP sticker is stuck on the bottom of the ballot, and he complained about that he's at the bottom of the ballot, the IFP, no one's going to vote for him, and he looks like a Thocolosh, so no one's going to vote for him either. So, and then the whole process of the election. There's a fantastic book called by Peter Harris, called Birth. And it's the birth of South Africa. It's the whole study of the election. You know, the government, the national South African government didn't even know how many people there were in South Africa. I mean, Prof. Twala talked about this was a census election. They didn't know. There weren't even proper maps of South Africa. You didn't know where villages were. And so, you know, the IEC that was put together to run the election, brought in people who did know. So they got the South African breweries to tell them where the villages were, because you can buy beer in any village in South Africa. So obviously SAB knows where all the villages are. There was a lack of trust. As I said, the police completely controlled by the government. You couldn't trust them. The Department of Home Affairs that ran the election, you couldn't trust them. You couldn't trust the army. So the ballot papers had to be printed overseas. You couldn't trust anyone in South Africa to do it. The ink that you had to put your finger in to vote had to be manufactured overseas so that there could be no kind of contamination. And as I said, at the very last minute, the IFP came into the election. Now, this was going to be a state-of-the-art election run by computer so that there could be no tampering with the results and the tallying of the votes. But on the first night, the computer system was corrupted. Suddenly, a huge number of ballots were added on, and mainly for white parties. So what did the IEC do? It had to do a manual count, and it took days to do. And everyone was getting angry and upset because the results aren't coming out. The election is being stolen. So it had to be counted manually. And Peter Harris says, there had to be some kind of compromise with the results. So he was there, so he would know. And the big thing was for white people was the ANC achieving a 2/3 majority. And if the ANC achieved a 2/3 majority in Parliament, it would be able to write the final constitution that was only, written by Parliament, after 1994. So to, allay white fears, Peter Harris said that the system, the counters simply stopped counting at 62% to make sure the ANC doesn't get a 2/3 majority. He also says that to assuage the IFP had to win KZN. So probably the ANC in fact did win KZN in 94, but in fact, but in reality, the IFP took KZN. And to assuage the fears of whites and the National Party had to take the Western Cape, even though the ANC probably won in the Western Cape as well. And this compromise extended to a government of national unity, where Nelson Mandela was the president, but he had a number of deputy presidents, F.W. de Klerk, Buthelezzi, etc. So it was a compromise, and this is what is important, that the historical context of 94 and the events leading up to 94 have to be taken into account to, make an assessment, make a judgment on this event that many people say was a sellout, etc. But I don't think that it would have happened had there not been a compromise. I don't think we would have been sitting here if there hadn't been a compromise made in 1994. I think that maybe civil war would have consumed a large part of South Africa if the ANC hadn't compromised, and of course if the National Party hadn't either, and the white right had been reined in. Okay, I've been told by Mr. Dudley that's enough. Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you very much. So this is our history faculty. This is just an invitation for those of you that are watching online to come and enroll at the University of Limpopo, to enrich yourself, with this historical knowledge. Not only do we have historians on the panel, we've got a sociologist, and I'm a student of philosophy. So please give us a round of applause, guys. History is very important. I think this is an invaluable lesson, especially to those of us, majority of us in the room, basically, who were born after 94. I was born 92. And what's interesting that happened in that year is that the white population mandated the National Party to vote, to negotiate, de Klerk, issued a referendum, to, ask for consent to negotiate. But who authorized the ANC to negotiate on behalf of the majority of the people? Who gave them that mandate to actually say, this is us, you can negotiate for us? So that's just, something for you to think about. And we'll now take questions just by rounds of 3 so that we are able to give each other a chance. Please, in your question, be brief, to the point. We've already had many presentations, so let's just try to be brief so that everyone can be covered. I recognize Dr. Miso. I recognize Brother Morore and my sister there. I will take you after comrades, those that I haven't taken. So in that order, Dr. Miso, the floor is yours. Okay, the mic is reaching Dr. Miso, who will be followed by Morore, and sister there, you will follow, then we'll just do it again. Dr. Miso.
Good morning and thank you, Ndade Tata. In Sesotho, we have a saying that goes like, "Sare swalo bolele, mothala wa motho ke molomo," which means until one is able to communicate or express his thoughts, the world will not know your views. As Ndade Tata adequately put it, that until the lion learns how to write, every story will glorify the hunter. To Prof. Twala, Dr. Vuma and Dr. Lakin, I need to ask you this question, a historic question in general, to say, are the universities in South Africa doing enough to keep the African history alive? Are the universities in Africa doing enough to keep the African history alive? If yes, where is the evidence? And if no, what could be the challenges and the possible solutions? Thank you.
Thank you very much. I think part of the answer to that question is that we are finding solutions for Africa. This is the panel that has just demonstrated that, that we are keeping this history alive. This event is part of, doing that. But the panel will respond to that question. Brother Morore.
Greetings. My name is Morore Skuku, and I'm the chairperson of the Azanian Philosophical Society Student Chapter. Well, because those people there in front are my teachers, can I make a comment first before I ask my question? Right. So, in the speech by Prof. Twala, he asked the question, did we gain democracy or freedom in 1994. I would like to say we gained democracy. In principle definition, well, democracy is that we give you individuals to take decisions in behalf of every one of us. And unfortunately, they failed. If that democracy is failing us because those decisions that they are making are not relevant to the achievements or the objectives which the revolution had for particular black Africans who were historically marginalized. So the question, does history open wounds or heal? Well, I'm angry as I'm speaking because of history. It does not heal, it opens wounds. It depends whose history is more relevant or is more pushed by media or people. I'll give an example. If Masseter, who died in 1994, brutally killed by the police, was to be raised today to say, would you have participated in that day and have died if you knew after 40 years this is what we would be having as South Africans, and especially as so my question is, can history ever be absolutely true? And can the writers and the interpreters of history ever lie? And so you mentioned, please.
Okay, Brother Mrore, thank you very much. Let's move on to the sister. I had asked that, let's not make presentations. Yeah, so I'm really going to be, something else. Sister.
Good day, everyone. Thank you for the opportunity. My question is, as much as we are preaching every day that how can we do better, I also have a question to say, how can we fix our problems, especially the economic problems that we are facing with here in South Africa, as Dr. Vuma already indicated that, and more especially the majority of population here in South Africa, which is the black people, they're the ones that are suffering from the economic crisis, and how can we fix that? And another question is, do we believe that can we ever have a good party that would eventually liberate people here in South Africa? Yeah.
Okay, thank you very much. Can we kindly please have the mic to Professor Twala to respond, and perhaps colleagues can also assist.
Thank you very much for all the questions. Can we keep African history alive? I think it depends upon us. We cannot throw that to somebody else to keep our history alive. We need to start with ourselves. But we can't keep African history alive if we are African by day and white by night. We need to be genuine to the African cause, and we need to embrace the African values, and then we can keep our history alive. I usually tell this story to people that my friend's daughter, then she was 6 years old, and then I asked this little girl, "What is your name?" And the little girl said, "I am Dino." And the little technology never loved me. And the little girl said, "I am Dino." And then I said to the little girl, "Write Dino." And the girl wrote Dineo. And then it shows that we want to be African, but at the same time, we don't want to be African. We want to be African when it suits us. But when it does not suit us, we are not Africans. At the University of Ghana in Accra, history is taken serious. At the Cheikh Anta Diop University in Senegal, history is taken serious. In many of the the American universities, you go to James Madison University, you go to Harvard, you go to Stanford, you find history being the subject. In fact, in some universities, you can't graduate your junior degree without history. You go to Tanzania. I was in Tanzania 2 months ago. History is serious. Then it depends on us whether to want to make history the serious discipline or not. But fortunately, myself and Dr. Vuma, we are involved with a project that is led by Professor Sifiso Ndlovu of looking at history differently from grade 4, if I'm not mistaken, to matric. And that will help us a lot, and as a compulsory subject. And people also, we must know that after 1994, there was a dip in our universities and in our high schools in terms of history being taken as a subject. At some point, when I started 21 years ago at my previous university teaching there, I had only 3 third-year students. 3, 1, 2, 3. They were attending in my class, in my office. And then, because it was done purposely, because all these former white schools, they said history is not important. And all our schools in the township followed that. But without understanding what was the reason for saying history was not important. It was not important because they were hiding what we were coming up with in terms of the history of Bigo, which is in grade 12 today, the history of the TRC, which is in grade 12 today. Those things were not there. Democracy and freedom. Somebody said to me, we are not having any democracy. We are just a democracy as South Africa. Can history tell the truth or history can tell the lie? Use your own spectacles. Thank you.
No, thank you very much. There was a question, I think, coming from the lady up there to say, how can we fix the economic challenges that we are confronted with today in the country? And I think when I was making a comment, I've answered that question to say that the first phase of our struggle, it was the struggle to attain political power. And we need to embark on the second phase of our struggle, which is the struggle for economic emancipation. Although it's not going to be an easy journey, the capital is not just going to surrender like that. They're going to fight back. And I personally feel that the second phase of our struggle is even going to be more brutal than the first phase of our struggle. Because in the second phase of our struggle, you may wake up one morning, you find that Unilever have withdrawn all their products in the shops. In the second phase of our struggle, you may wake up and find that some of the mines or other means of production have been dismantled, you understand, which will actually cause more economic hardship for the black community. Then the second question that you have asked is that can we have a political party that is perfect, which can actually address some of the challenges that we're confronted with in the country. And my question is, no, you can't have a perfect political party, because political parties behave like human beings, because by nature they lead by human beings. In your family, if you are 10 or 15, can you all be perfect? In your family, you can't be perfect. So, but what we can have is that we can have a political party that actually address issues or challenges that are confronted our people in a faster pace than in a tortoise pace. But we can't have perfect political parties as long as political parties are led by human beings. As much as we don't have perfect human beings, we can't have a perfect political party. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I believe at this point it is an opportune.
I also wanted to add on the second question, whether or not we'll ever have a perfect political party. As I've mentioned earlier, that you are the leaders of tomorrow. If you think you can do better, then start now. Because as Doc was saying, that we are led by humans who promise to do better when they are not in power. Once they get into power, they start to do things differently. So it is our homework that if we want to change South Africa, then let us take an action. Let us become the leaders that are not corrupt, that will strive for the best. Remember that you are doing this for your kids and your grandkids. Don't do it for yourself. There are other people that will come after you. Thank you.
Thank you very much to our panel. Really, this was an enriching conversation, and I should say that we won't be able to exhaust everything today. Going away, you know, this is our faculty. They are forever available. Attend your classes. Make sure that you attend classes for you to get more of this knowledge. At this point, I'd like us to just take a short 5-minute break before we begin the next session, which will be the book launch, so that we allow time for our technical crew to connect us with the people that are joining us online, including Professor Mabokhomore, who is online as we speak. So just a brief 5 minutes breather, then we shall be back at 20 past, exactly 20 past. Everyone must be seated for the book launch to commence. Thank you. my mind, I was thinking that the people should be here on the panel, but I'm just, it just came to my mind that you guys are there. So before we can begin, I'd like to call upon the representative from the HSRC to come and speak about the production of this book and issues related to that. So can we please give a round of applause to Shanice Khan. Shanice. Shanice. Okay, she's coming. She's just at the stall outside the venue. He's just making her way in here just to talk to the bureaucratic aspects to book production as well. Shanice, she's here. Give her a round of applause, please.
Hi everyone. Hi Prof. More, how are you? See him over there. Yeah. Can you see me?
Yeah, sure. I think you can see.
Okay.
Maybe just
Okay. So I'm from HSRC Press, IESA and Pesred Publishing, which is a publishing division from HSRC. And basically, I'd like to thank you for attending the book launch, obviously on Noel Chapani Mangani, being while black and alienated. Okay, so we obviously did the book with Professor Mabogo More. He's a retired professor of philosophy at the following institutions: University of Northwest, University of Durban Westville, University of KwaZulu-Natal, and the University of Limpopo. He's currently the associate researcher at the University of Limpopo and has over the years 50 journal and articles, book chapters, and 3 books. One of our favorite and bestsellers is Biko, which is one of our HSRC press imprints and is still one of our bestsellers on our backlist. And basically, it is an integral process to publish with HSRC Publishing and HSRC Press, which is a prestigious, one of the prestigious scholarly imprints of HSRC. And it is a long process. There's a lot of bureaucracy, but we do try and ensure that the books that we produce does basically contribute to knowledge creation and knowledge dissemination. A lot of the authors that do publish with us, they publish it with us on the basis that the information will be available to the broader public and it's accessible. So I know that this book will be one of the books that will be available in a couple of months' time on open access. I encourage the students to join our open access community at www.hsrcpress.ac.za. I think this is going to be a great launch of the book. It is a great perspective and analysis on Noel Chapani Mangani, the first black clinical psychologist in South Africa, and his writings. And I hope that the students can have a good takeaway from this, and Professor More will obviously speak on that. Thank you so much. I have nothing more to add.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Shanice. It's really, a pleasure to have, an employer, come to our campus to inform us about the things like your prospective career opportunities. So for those of you who are in the social sciences, the humanities, this is really, like a good opportunity to learn about publishing, to learn about, the employment opportunities that HSRC has in line with IESA. I see that I'm losing connection. Okay, sorry about that. I think it's just one of those things with technology, but we shall adapt. This is the fourth industrial revolution. So before I call Sister Sarah Sitlaelo to introduce Professor Mabogo More, there is a section, I just wanted to also show that we have the book. The book is on sale outside. For those that are here, like they can do that. For those that are interested, they can order the book online. It is available. I think there is an email address that they need to, but I think Van Skyke does have the book now. The book is out, so people should have access to the book. So before I call Sister Sarah, I actually wanted to read just this paragraph from the acknowledgement section, where Professor More reflects on his encounter with Professor Manganyi's work. So he says, besides the rhetoric of the black consciousness proponents, my first encounter with a serious articulation of negritude occurred in 1971 through Noel Chabani Manganyi, who presented a paper on the subject. He spoke about the advocates of negritude, such as Senghor and Cizé, and how the black consciousness movement could be traced to their thought. Because negritude was associated with the francophone black thinkers, Manganyi also discussed critiques of negritude by anglophone writers such as Wole Soyinka and Eskia Mphahlele, who argued that since a tiger does not announce its tigritude, it is therefore superfluous for Negroes to pronounce their negritude. I was then a third-year philosophy student at Turflop University, one of the apartheid-created black universities, and had never heard of the philosophy of negritude, let alone of any African or Afrikaner philosophy. Manganyi's lecture ignited the desire to learn more about him and his work. So I think the part that I had wanted to, touch on was precisely the history. Professor More was here in 71, doing philosophy. So if you are here in 2024 doing philosophy, there's history that is being made. So without any further ado, I'd like to call upon Sister Sarah to introduce Prof. More, who will then proceed to give us just a synopsis of the book in 30 to 40 minutes, after which we will have Mr. Zolisa Mjalela, who is here with me, who will give a response to this intellectual appreciation of Manganyi, after which Sister Sarah will then come back and touch on some of the issues, and hopefully some of the people that are here online can have some questions, as well as some questions from the floor. So this is how we'll proceed. Sister Sarah, can you kindly please maybe just also turn on the video? We are, streaming live, so you can just maybe turn on your video so that people can also see you as you introduce Prof. More. Can you please give Sister Sarah a round of applause? It appears that we can't hear you,
You still can't hear me?
Yes, we can hear you now, loud and clear.
Okay, that's wonderful. Thank you.
Cool. Do your thing.
Okay, great. Good morning, everybody. It is such a privilege and an honor to be able to participate in today's event. And it's basically one of those moments in time where we look back at where we've come from and look at where we are, and of course, we start charting a path for where we want to go to. And there's no better way than to accept and take the guidance of some of the most amazing thinkers that we have currently, not just in the discipline of philosophy, but thinkers across the board. And one of those we have the privilege of being able to listen to today at the launch of his fourth book. So without any further waste of time, I will just briefly take you through a short biography of Professor Maboho Percy More, just as an overview of his works and his career path. So Professor More is a retired professor of philosophy and has served as a lecturer as well as an administrator at several of our South African institutions, which include what used to be called Turf University, the University of Durban-Westville, University of KwaZulu-Natal, and currently he serves as an associate researcher at the University of Limpopo. However, early in his career, he has had the privilege of being awarded 3 fellowships from American institutions, which include Indiana University, University of Illinois, as well as Harvard University. As far as his publications are concerned, he's published over 50 journal articles and book chapters and commentaries, and also 4 books, and these are namely Ego, Philosophy, Identity and Liberation from 2017, his memoirs, very inspiring memoirs called Looking Through Philosophy in Black in 2019, his offering Sartre on Contingency, Anti-Black Racism and Embodiment in 2021, and of course today we are here to celebrate and launch Noel Chabani Manganye, Being While Black and Alienated in Apartheid South Africa. And then More has also been captured in his capacity as a philosopher, as well as More the man, in a biography written by Professor Tendai Sikole titled Maboho P. More, Philosophical Anthropology in Azania, which was published in 2022. And also something very, very important to mention is that Professor More is the Caribbean Philosophical Association Award winner of the France Fanon Lifetime Achievement Award in 2015. A huge, huge achievement that has indeed put South Africa on the map in a sense. And finally, in terms of fields of scholarship, his theorizing lies at the convergence of Africana existential philosophy, continental European existentialism, Black existentialism, and Black consciousness philosophy. So I really am honored and privileged to be associated with Prof. More, and I too am looking forward to his address. And on that note, I hand over to you, Buktabang.
Thank you very much for that introduction. I should also say that Professor Manganye has recently been honored by the Caribbean Philosophical Society. You know, the prestigious Frantz Fanon Prize, which Professor More holds, has been bestowed to Professor Chabani Manganye. I think that deserves a round of applause. Also, institutionally, there are talks of honoring this intellectual icon of our institution through an annual public lecture, but that is something that is still, you know, in the pipeline. That is something that is will still be appreciated. So without any further ado, I'd like to give Prof. More the opportunity to speak to us about this intellectual icon and intellectual contribution. Can you please give him a round of applause?
Can everybody hear me?
Yes, Prof, we can hear you.
Can you hear me?
Loud and clear.
Okay. I should start off by giving props to people who have not only been in my life, but also have done a great deal of work in certain spheres which affected my life. I would like first to express my thanks to the organizer of this event, Mr. Taban Zaza. I hope, Taban, that very soon, and I want to emphasize that I'll be calling you professor or doctor. I also want to make a special thanks to the head of the acting head of the Department of Cultural and Political Studies, who has found it very appropriate to let this event happen. And I'm grateful for that. The only thing is that maybe in future we should not only have cultural and political studies, we should also include philosophy in that. Because philosophy is part and parcel of that department. I want also to make a big shout to Professor McCallum, the Vice Chancellor, who I saw somewhere in the audience, for having had me back to my alma mater in 2015 and, having assisted me in many ways. And for that, I'd like also to make a big shout to Dr. Sarah. She has been a solid core part of the writing of this book. I used to use her as something that I could bump my ideas on, and then she helped me really, really greatly in making this book available to all of us. For that, I am thankful. I want to apologize, however, for not being able to be there personally because of ill health. In 2018, I suffered from aneurysm and I had a brain operation which made me incapable of doing quite a lot of other things. And I left University of Limpopo, not because I absconded or whatever as the narrative goes, but because I was ill and had to be at home because of ill health, which I'm still having even now. Now, after all that being said and done, if we all look, I'd like us to look at the cover of the book and maybe talk about what the cover represents. The cover of a book tells a story, and this is not an exception to that, because on this cover, we find the name of Noel Chobani Mangani, who is the subject of the book. But following that as a subtitle is Being While Black and Alienated in Apartheid South Africa. Now, if you look at that title, being while, there's a hyphen in between being and while, and then a hyphen between while and black, and a hyphen between black and a hyphen between. So this is a hyphenated notion which calls to mind a philosophical categories of being in the world, and also was intended to remind people of Shabani Mangani's classical book, Being Black in the World, which also had hyphenated title to show an ontological connection between between blackness and alienation and being. So this book tells the title tells a lot of stories about what is in the book. If you look at the picture of the book, a picture of Shabani Mangani, he is now 84 years old. He's older than me by 6 years, and he's not well at the moment. But if you look at the picture is Shabani Mangani as a young intellectual. That tells a story about what is into the book as itself. Because in the book, I deal with the early Shabani Mangani rather than the later Shabani Mangani. We normally have in thinkers, we normally have the early thinker and the late thinker. For instance, if you look at Frantz Fanon's book, Black Skin, White Mask, that represents the early Frantz Fanon. But his later book, The Wretched of the Earth, represents the later Frantz Fanon. And when you look at the two books, sometimes an author, because one developed in one's thinking, sometimes the author even repudiates the idea or his early ideas also. So you find that in Hegel, you find that in Sartre, for instance. In Sartre you have Being and Nothingness as the book, and then later the Critique of Dialectical Reason, which is the second book, and the Critique of Dialectical Reason is a kind of a critique of being and nothingness. So Mangani also has an early and a later version of himself. I talk of the early Mangani, of the Black consciousness movement, and the later Mangani of the, I don't want to say ANC, but a liberal Mangani, who is different from the early Mangani of the Black. Now, the point of book is why would we want to talk of Mangani? What makes Mangani so important for us to even write a book about him? Now, he is the main subject of it. And I could frame it this way. I could say who, why, when, where, and what is Shabani Mangani? Now the who in that question refers to identity, his identity. The why in that question refers to, it's a teleological question that refers to the purposes that he intended fulfilling. The when is the historical part of Shabani Mangani. And then the where is the spatial context within which Mangani grew and worked. And then lastly, the what is the ontological question of who and what is Mangani. And if you look at all these questions, you will realize that on the title of the book, there is being, which is an ontological category, and black, which is an identity category, and apartheid and alienation connected because the one is the source of the other. It becomes social, political, and psychological issue. So Manganyi then is that person. Now, why write a book about Manganyi? What justification of it to write a book about it? Let me start first by connecting him to the University of Limpopo. In 1959, the apartheid government promulgated law which was called the Extension of Universities Act of 1959, which law established the University of the North and the University of Zululand. And then the University of Fort Hare was already there, but it was under Rhodes University. So all these universities which were created in 1959 were in accordance with apartheid separate development, which means Taflo, which we normally call Sovinga, was for Tutu, vendors, and Shanghai. Whereas the University of Zululand, which was in Goye, was only catering for the Zulus, and the University of Fort Hare was supposed to cater for Xhosa. So this was the apartheid plan of separating people according to the ethnic belonging. Now, Chabani Manganyi, I'm making this point of 1959 because Chabani Manganyi was one of the first students at the University of the North, which is now University of Limpopo. He registered in 1960 and then got his BA in 1962. In 1963 and 1964, he completed his honors degree. During those times, honors was not a one-year course, it was a 2-year course. You had to do 2 years in order to get it. So he completed his honors in 1963 and 1964. Now, legend has it that Manganyi was an honor student. The way he was so much of a reader, he used to go to the library to borrow books with a wheelbarrow. He used to carry his books in a wheelbarrow because there were so many, he couldn't carry them. For example, he had to use a wheelbarrow. That's how much of a reader Manganyi was. Now, to bring it back to the University of Limpopo, in 1990, after having gone through other, experiences in his life, he came back to the University of the North and became the Vice Chancellor of this university in 1990. So Chabani Manganyi has a history with this university, and that makes it very important for us to take into account. Now, who was Chabani Manganyi intellectually and academically? Chabani Manganyi is the person who was the first black person to acquire a PhD in clinical psychology, which means he was the first black clinical psychologist in South Africa. He wrote, and I'm going to call all these books, or mention all these books, because that's going to show us where the rupture in his thinking occurs and where it goes. His first book was a classic, and is still a classic book, and it's been reprinted by the University of the Witwatersrand, I think in 2019. This book influenced a lot of black consciousness, including myself. It is a book that is called Being Black in the World, which was published in 1973. It was followed by another book titled Mashangu's Reverie and Other Essays in 1977. In 1977 again, he published another book called Alienation and the Body in a Racist Society. And then in 1981, he published another book titled Looking Through the Keyhole, Dissenting Essays on the Black Experience. Now, this, I want us to understand this. These four books constitute the early Manganyi, the Manganyi who was a black consciousness intellectual. The later books, in the later Manganyi, in 1983, he started to get into biography. He started to write biography of important South African artists and academics. He started with Eskiam Pasela, and he published a book titled Exiles and Homecoming, a biography of Eskiam Pasela, which was published in 1983. In 1984, the following year, he published a book called Bury Me at the Marketplace, Selected Letters of Eskiam Pasela. In 1990, he published, together with a political philosopher who I know, who was teaching at Cape Town University at that time, Andre de Toit. Shabani Manganyi and Andre de Toit published a book entitled Political Violence and the Struggle in South Africa. Political violence during the time was so rampant. There was the war between Inca and ANC, and we had quite a lot of violence going on. And there was a case, a particular case, which affected quite a lot of South Africans, the case of Marquis Kusana, who was accused wrongly, I think, wrongly accused of being an informer to the special branch, to the security police. Marquis Kusana was put, tires were put around her, whom they were lit, and Marquis Kusana burned to death in public in the street. So that very event made Manganyi begin to think about issues of violence and struggle in South Africa. Now, in 1991, he moved back to the ideas of the early period, and he wrote a book again called Treachery and the Truth of the Subject, Psychology and Racial Differences in South Africa. But then, later on again, in 1996, he went back to biography, to biographical literature, and wrote a book about an artist from Pretoria who was in exile in France, and his name was Gerard Secord. So Manganyi began to write. He wrote a book called The Black Man Called Secord, and that was written in 1996. In 2004, he continued with Gerard Secord and wrote a book called Gerard Secord, I Am an African. That resonates with Mbeki's, right? I'm an African. So that was in 2004. Manganyi had written that book on Gerard Secord. In 2012, he went to New York to interview one of the artists, South African artists, who was living in New York. His name was Dumile Feni. And then Manganyi produced the book, The Beauty of the Life, Life and Times of Dumile Feni. Now, he's been writing biographies of him. In 2016, he decided, okay, he's going to write an autobiography. He's going to write a book, and this book, I must say, when I read it, it gave me some impetus to begin to write my own memoirs. So he wrote his own memoirs in 2016, entitled Apartheid and the Making of a Black Psychology. I'm citing all these books because if you have noticed that in his later life, he concentrates much more on biographies and autobiography rather than in, issues of racism and struggle and all that. Whereas in the early works of Thabani Manganyi, the issues of racism, anti-black racism, was one of the focal points of his, theorization. So he can be divided into the two, and this is fundamentally a book on the early Manganyi rather than on the late Manganyi. And that's for good reasons. Firstly, the early Manganyi was not only a psychologist, he was a philosopher too. So you will see the first chapter of the book is Manganyi, the philosopher, the psychologist philosopher. The psychologist philosopher. And chapter 2 is the philosopher psychologist. Now, what interests me in Manganyi fundamentally is his engagement in and with philosophers in his psychology studies. So I put in and I've argued that besides being a psychologist, which of course he says it clearly that he's a psychologist, I argue that because of his interest, very vast knowledge of philosophy, Manganyi can also be justifiably called a philosopher. So this is it. Now, maybe I should come to another justification why Manganyi. Now, these books, which there are about 12 or so. Here is an intellectual who writes so many books, but gets no recognition from anybody in his country. Nobody writes a book about him. Nobody cares. The psychological societies of South Africa doesn't even. So he's ignored. His work is ignored completely. And that is one of the reasons why I had to write this book, because I figured out if no psychologist is going to write this book, I am going to do it, even if I do it from a philosophical point of view. So this book is fundamentally the first book on Thabani Manganyi, because nobody had written that. The only acknowledgement he got was in 2017 after he had published his memoirs. And there was a special issue in the Journal of Psychology in South Africa on the memoirs only, and a lot of people never even spoke about his early work. Thabani Manganyi also in his autobiography also does not speak of his early work. In fact, he he pushes it to the side as if it was not there. Yet his early life is the only way in which black people were influenced by him. I mean, his being black in the world was a classical book, and still is a classical book that influenced a lot of people. Maybe I should become personal here. Tabani Zaza has read a clip from my book. Indeed, the first time I heard of African philosophy, I was doing third year at that time. Third year in philosophy, and I had never come across any text or any mention of any African philosopher. We were taught, we did Hegel, we did Merleau-Ponty, we did Kant, we did all those European Western philosophers. Nothing was said about. In fact, I didn't even have an idea or a clue whether there exists a thing called African philosophy at that time. When Mangani came to Taflob in 1971, he delivered a paper on negritude. Now, I've written a lot on negritude in my book on Biko. Anybody who wants to go and see that, you'll find a lot of information on negritude. But the main figures of negritude were Leopold Sédar Senghor, were Amos Césaire, and Leon Gontras Damas. These were the three intellectuals students, in fact, in Paris, who, because of the racism that was going on in Paris during their student days, they decided to make or to form themselves into a group of African students and Caribbean students and called their philosophy negritude. Now, the word negritude comes from the word Negro. Because they were called Negroes, they said that they are going to adopt the very word which is derogatory and transform it into a word which is positive. And they came with the theory of negritude. Now, you will remember this is the same thing that black consciousness did. The word black was not on the agenda. We were called natives, we were called non-Europeans, we were called Bantus, we were called all sorts of things except black. When blackness was mentioned in relation to us, it was derogatory. So you remember that black consciousness began to adopt the word black with all the negative connotations that are attached to the word black and turned it around upside down and turned it into a positive word which made us proud to be called black. So black consciousness, Biko and SAS students used the same method that the negritude students did in turning a negative concept into a positive identity concept. So, in 1971, when he did that, I was doing third year. And for the first time I learned that there is something that is called African philosophy. In 1973, he came to he published the book Being Black in the World. At that time I was doing honors, and my professor, whose name is F.J. Engelbrecht, had written an article which he published at that university, University of the North. And Engelbrecht wrote a paper titled State and Neurose Baby Bantu, which means, translated, it means time and neurosis among the blacks, among the Bantus. So what he was saying and arguing, because he was an apologist of the apartheid regime, he argued that African time is very slow as compared to white time. That Africans live fundamentally in the past and have no sense whatsoever of the future. And given those two things, therefore, blacks and whites in South Africa cannot live together. There cannot be integration and there cannot be equality because of the difference of our conception of time. That was in 1972. The last chapter of Mangani's book, Being Black in the World, which is titled The Postscriptum of Time, Time and Neurosis. Mangani was the first person to critique the Engelbrecht position, and he really did a good job. And if you read that critique, you will see how damning the critique was of Engelbrecht. And in the meantime, Engelbrecht was my head of the department in philosophy, and I was doing an honors paper under him and stuff like that. So he came to my office and said, Mangani has written this. For some reason he thought I would agree with him and not with Mangani. And when I didn't, then my relationship with him began to be soured. And I decided to do my master's at UNISA, and that also caused a lot of tension between me and him, because he said, I don't want to do masters under him because I have no confidence in him. I have no respect for his philosophical acuity and stuff like that. But I said, look, I don't want to be a junior degree, honors, master's, PhD under the same person. I'll be a clone of that person. I don't want that. So my relationship with Engelbrecht, at that time when I was doing master, he was already the head of department. So Engelbrecht and Mangani had a conflict, a very big conflict with each other. Now, in 1980, I was in New York. That was New Year's Eve and New Year's Day, and I ran into Chabani Mangani, and we hung together. We were together during New Year's Eve and New Year's Day. But New Year's Day we went to the party, and the party was hosted by the ANC people in New York. And when we got there, at that time, unfortunately, at that time, Chabani Mangani was the dean and the head of department of psychology at the University of Transkei. When we got into the party, there were Lesotho people out there who objected to Mangani's presence in the party and claimed that he is there in New York only to come and recruit people for Homeland and Bantustan universities. And the party stopped. But to leave with him because we came with him. We left the party. In 1987, when I was doing a PhD at UCT, incidentally, a PhD on black alienation, Shabani Manganyi and I, we met again, and we had some fabulous time, but ultimately there was a quarrel between me and him. And I left and I went home. The following morning at 10, he was knocking at my door and he said, look, let's go and have lunch together. This was the man who put aside, little quarrels and invited me for lunch, and we had a very good time together with him. So why am I saying all this? I'm saying all this because I'm trying to say, why is Manganyi necessary for a book? Because of his publication, which were ignored, and because of so many things. Now, Manganyi, as I said, ignores his early work in his later work. And now, so I thought I should stick only on his early work because his early work contains a gem of existential phenomenology and all that. So I did that. Now, I want to come to another theme. Do I have time?
Well, you can quote the theme and maybe just close, Prof.
I want to come to another theme, which is part and parcel of the book. I've spoken about the subject of the book. Now, the other theme that is in the book is alienation. Now, alienation is a very problematic concept because it can be applied in medicine, in psychiatry, in law, in sociology, in philosophy. For instance, in law, alienation is taken to be something that separates someone from property. Okay? So, alienation is an important aspect of our life. And there are books now that are coming out to show how important the concept of alienation is. Even today, there's a book that just came out in 2018 on alienation and freedom on Fanon's work. And then, right now, this year, Achille Mbembe has just published a book called Brutalism, which is basically a book on alienation. So all these things, Manganyi, alienation, and the question of anti-black racism, which is contained within the concept black as an identity tag, all form the gist of the book.
Thank you very much, Prof. The reason I'm stopping you is that, the publisher is just outside and they want people to buy the book. So
They want you?
They want people to buy the book. So if you're just giving it all away, they might not see any reason to actually buy it. So if you want to find out more about the themes of alienation that Prof is talking about, please buy the book. It's actually going for about 300. I think the people from Van Skyke, they're just outside. You can just go and inquire. We've also ordered copies for our library. Our library is also here. So the book will be made available. And I should also say that for those of you who are doing HPHL 011, History of Philosophy, you will know what Prof was talking about. Some of the early works that you just wrote a test on, Us and Them, Black Consciousness, Being Black in the World, these, are the themes that Prof touches on in this intellectual contribution. I take it this is an intellectual biography of Manganyi's work, and insofar as he ignores his early work, in his later work, Prof has just done that for him. Like, he just remembered his early work, you know, to his oeuvre.
Can I just add a word here?
Cool.
I'd be happy if you review the book. And I'd be happy if anybody reviews the book.
Actually, we have someone who is reviewing the book,
Okay.
who is Mr. Mjalela Ubango, endizombiza kwangoku ba azawuresponda. No, so thank you very much, Prof. Can we please give Prof a round of applause? Siyabonga kakhulu, Prof. Mchilibi, xesha lakho ngoku, bra. Can you please give Professor Mchilibi a round of applause?
Good day to everyone. I would like to send a special greetings to the VC, the faculty dean, our school director, and our acting HOD in their absentia. But at least we know that our VC is here with us. Thank you, Prof. Yes, Tabang has said that I am uzolisa kazolisa, uzolisa kazalisile, uzalisile kangodliso, ngodliso kamhlonhlo. Ndingumtshilibe ubhanqo undizulanga umdumane ubobese. Yena ozalwa intombi yorhadebe omthimkhulu ondlebe entle zombini. Ndithi ndiyacamagusha. I do this introduction today because we are talking of blackness and being alienated. Therefore, I cannot by all means to speak today and yet alienate myself from the tradition, the culture, and the customs that I come from. I was given a task on this book. And I cannot but admit that through reading this book, I found myself tossing and turning, reflecting on the issues I'm faced with as a black scholar of philosophy. I would like to start from an existential point of view and reflect on the idea of alienation. Thank you. I would like to start from the existential point of view and reflect on the idea of alienation. While I was reading this book, I was confronted by a memory where upon finishing my undergrad with majors in philosophy, sociology, and psychology, and with the prospect of wanting to do psychology, my mother in our celebration said to me, "We don't want a psychologist in our house. Your studies are your studies." And she said this jokingly, and to my surprise, that statement quite haunted me on the reflection as to why would this person, having borrowed loans to pay for my school fees because I could not get NSFAS, and yet in my celebration of this degree, yet I am told I should not be a psychologist in this house. So what was I supposed to be? This question I posed to myself was a true reflection of what both Manganyi and More elucidate as alienation. Throughout the book, Professor Moore, in great detail, highlights different forms of alienation, even though he is particularly concerned with blackness, or what we can understand as alienation, the alienation of blackness. From reading the book, we get the sense that we are navigating through alienation from our very existence. For instance, Moore argues that the human subjects are thrown into the universe that provides no definitive or absolute answers to their deepest questions concerning the meaningfulness of life and its values. Because they feel alienated from the world, things, others, and themselves, they are then confronted by a sense of absurdity and meaningfulness. I would like to emphasize that from the moment we are born, we are already separated from our true selves, because the world was already had already assigned to us an identity based on certain characteristics. Whether we are male, female, who our parents are, and what our names will be are some of the things that the world has already assumed and has begun formulating for us. By the time we are born, an identity has already been created for us, even before we have had the chance to discover ourselves. After being thrown into the world, individuals can experience alienation from their past, present, and future. As Moore shows in this book, Manganye, like any other black people living in apartheid South Africa, was alienated from all forms of life as a result of blackness. He, Manganye, was alienated from becoming. This notion of alienation from becoming is derived from Moore's interpretation of Sartre, who argues that alienation is ontologically based in the human condition and from the very nature of human existence or human consciousness, one is alienated. Some might associate this kind of reading with social determinism. The main idea here is that in life, we often find ourselves navigating situations that alienate us from becoming. For instance, as an academic, one may be pressured to obtain a PhD to be taken serious, or may be told that their work is not philosophical enough, and instead it belongs to other fields such as African studies, sociology, or anthropology. The book argues that it is important to acknowledge our limitations as well as our abilities and potential. Manganye, as the first black clinical psychologist, had to hide his influences from the forbidden radical African scholars in his work. Perhaps one could argue that he was an exception, despite facing unfavorable conditions. As a black psychologist working in a white-only discipline, during his time, he has faced restrictions that prevented him from reaching his full potential. We can argue that it had diverted him from becoming what he could have been if these restrictions were not there. Although this book reflects on Manganye's work, it inspires us to recognize that other black scholars have faced great challenges than today. Despite having fewer resources, they were able to overcome their barriers. As an aspiring psychology student, I have felt disconnected and alienated from the subject at times. This led me to explore philosophy, and now I find myself applying philosophical concepts to psychological issues. I wonder if my initial sense of disconnection from psychology was necessary in order for me to expand my understanding and approach to the subject itself. It seems that when my mother said she did not want a psychologist in her house, she wasn't warning me against pursuing a career in psychology. Rather, she may have meant that she didn't want my interest in psychology to disrupt the peace in our home. Unfortunately, there is a common trend in African societies where educated individuals end up becoming a burden to their communities instead of contributing positively. If we look back at the history of native education in South Africa, we learn that the education given to the native in the early 1800s was aimed at detribalizing them and separating them from their cultures and societies. The problem is that once these natives acquired the education that was deemed good for them, then they were unable to use it to uplift their communities. This same issue persists today. Many of us hold master's degrees and PhDs, but instead of using our education to benefit our communities, we often become part of the problem. And as I read Professor Moret's book, I find myself feeling incredibly disconnected from others, myself, and my future. However, I believe that the answers I seek may be found within the pages of this wonderful book, as Professor Moret's teachings are already familiar to my experience as a philosopher at the University of Limpopo. I believe that the ancestors of this university would be proud of your success and are standing in ovation, applauding and celebrating it. This year, as we celebrate the institution's 60th anniversary, it is an honor to reflect on some of the Black intellectuals that this institution has produced. When I read this book, I see that it truly reflects Black excellence. Thank you for accepting our initiative as young aspiring philosophers in Turflop. We are trying to make philosophy and academia fashionable, and having you with us today, I believe our students will remember this day and history will remember us. My message to the Black alienated and marginalized subjects, my message to you is that please go get the book and find your own answers. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Brother Zolisa. Can we please give him another round of applause? Just trying to find out whether our guests online are able to follow us. Thinking in particular of Sister Sarah, who is our discussant today. But before I just bring her in, I just need that confirmation. Comrades, are we fine? Like, can the people hear us, like in the Google Meet meeting? Great stuff. On the theme of alienation, like it is really interesting that, it's a very important theme and one which has revolutionized the reception of Marxist thought post-World War II, particularly with the publication of the 1854, manuscripts. Like the themes of alienation really caused a stir, like, within the, academic space, and, caused a renewed appreciation of that intellectual contribution of Marx. So, in discussing alienation, I know it's also a theme, which Sartre talks about, which Manganyi does reflect on. For those of you who don't know, Prof Prof did also touch on, his early work, Alienation and the Body in a Racist Society, Being Black in the World, Looking Through the Keyhole. There's just plenty. I'm told that Prof More will be engaging the Department of Psychology on these themes on Chabani Mangani. So also please be on the lookout for that as we continue to honor this intellectual contribution. But then without any further ado, I'd like to give to Sister Sarah to give some discussion points. Just a minute. We're trying to project Sister Sarah's picture here so that at least we can be one. Comrades. Okay. Sister Sarah, I think it is possible that you can proceed with your discussion points if we can have your audio while we fix the viewing. Over to you, sister.
Okay. Are you able to hear me?
Loud and clear.
Oh, that's wonderful. First of all, thank you very much, Prof. More, for a beautiful walk down memory lane. I wish we could have had more time for you to actually take us through your journey with, Manganye, his thinking, your interpretation of it, as well as just the historical journey of his thought, which, as you rightly said, could be separated into his early works versus his latter work. I think due to time constraints, there's only one thing that I would like to raise in addition to what our respondent has already touched on. And I think what I zero in with this book is the subtitle, In Apartheid South Africa. I think the impression that this might give is that the book is just a historical analysis of the identity of being Black in the world during apartheid. So in other words, it might be interpreted as just a snapshot of a moment in time, and then post-apartheid, as in beyond 1994 onwards, very much like Manganyi did, we might then be implored to move on, just move on and get over what transpired, and also have a vision for a different future and so forth. But I think, just briefly, if one is able to employ the analogy of what happened not just in South Africa but in the world with the COVID-19 pandemic, we will notice that there was the initial discourse around what the source was, being the coronavirus, as well as the immediate consequences. And those immediate consequences included people getting infected by the virus. It included issues of morbidity in terms of people who were likely to be infected, issues of comorbidity, people with pre-existing conditions, and in the worst case scenario, we had the issue of mortality where people died. So if one takes that same analogy and applies it to apartheid in terms of its implementation from 1949 to 1994, perhaps using the analogy, one would see that as the pandemic unfolding in real time across those decades. However, what I think many of us will admit to is the actual consequences that people then had to live with once the pandemic and the infections died down. And when one uses this analogy to look at apartheid and its consequences, we end up with a scenario where those who died left people behind. So there's the consequence of living with actual death. And then there are those who were disabled by contracting the virus and them having to live with the disabilities that came out of that. And ultimately, there are those who lived with a condition that was diagnosed as long COVID in terms of the DNA impact of the virus on people and what they had to live with. So when one looks at Prof. More's offering right now, we are basically tracing this pandemic, this international global pandemic of anti-Black racism, and in South Africa specifically, it manifesting as apartheid, and the long-term consequences of it. And that's why Prof. More going to retrieve thinking, thought, concepts, and theories about this particular condition dating back to the actual apartheid era. We as students now, we as scholars now, we as people living with the consequences of this are put in a position where what Prof. More calls in chapter 10, the supersession of alienation, the de-alienation process or the disalienation process is what we have to grapple with now, because we are still affected by the consequences of anti-Black racism and its manifestation in various ways. So we are in essence living in a society where there's a comorbidity between our existence as Black people and the heritage of anti-Black racism caused by white supremacy that we have to deal with. And for my part, I believe the book takes us through that journey and puts us in a position to equip us on how we can deal with this lingering effect of this phenomenon. Thank you.
Can I respond?
Yes, please, Prof.
Can I respond?
You will get your time. Maybe
Can I respond?
Sure thing.
I agree with Dr. Sitlaelo completely. But the reason why there's apartheid in the title is because I wanted, apartheid is quintessentially, oh yes, it is, quintessentially anti-Black racism. And anti-Black racism hasn't gone, despite the fact that we have legislation that forbids it. We still have anti-Black racism in all manner of ways in which, so, but much more important, I was trying to connect alienation and apartheid. And I kept on saying apartheid is separation. And the fundamental concept of alienation from whatever, whether psychological, philosophical, political, Marxist, you name it, whatever, the underlying notion in alienation is separation, either from yourself, from other human beings, from labor, from things. So I was trying to say, as long as there's apartheid, there will be alienation, because apartheid is a necessary and sufficient condition for the existence of alienation. Now, we have moved from, we have just erased, in today's world, we have just erased the word apartheid. But the practices that we get are still a perpetuation of apartheid in another way, which means that the condition, which is anti-Black racism, is still there, and therefore alienation is still a problem that we as Black people do have. So you are right. Maybe the word, for those who believe that apartheid is gone, which I don't. I always even write post-apartheid in my work, right? And those who believe that apartheid is gone, well, will say, okay, alienation must be gone because apartheid was a necessary condition for the existence of alienation. Now, I'm arguing that apartheid is quintessentially anti-black, and anti-black racism is still around, which means if apartheid caused was a necessary cause of alienation and anti-blackness. Therefore, we are not yet through, or we have not superseded alienation, precisely because we still have the anti-black racism that we experience today, which is so, I mean, if you think of the land question and all those things that are still around us, you realize that we are not, we're still in a post-apartheid condition.
Indeed, Prof, indeed. I really have to stop you there because you're really going to put me into trouble. People need to buy the book. Guys, if you really want to find out about alienation, just buy the book. Also, I think, the Department of Psychology should, send the invitation earlier so that we can have the meaningful, elucidations on this work, this very important work. I don't think it can be exhausted just in one sitting, which, I think it requires for us to have reading groups around it to really explore in depth, in detail, some of these themes as students in the humanities, and particularly those of you that are doing philosophy. Okay, so thank you very much to the responses, to the discussion. Thank you very much. I think I just want to touch on what Brother Zolisa, alluded to, that this is in effect, a very important, ceremony, like that, an ancestral ceremony, because this is the intellectual history and heritage of this institution. And in my conversation with Professor More, he did indicate that he actually did history 1, 2, and 3 with Unkgopotse, whom was assassinated 50 years ago by the apartheid state. So in some way, this is really, like that homecoming, right? So like us talking, in this way, having these conversations is in some way, some communion. Okay, guys, I've spoken for a long time. Let's see how many questions can we take at this point, just by rounds of 3. I recognize you, Mr. Mankhero, Chifora, and my brother over there. Okay, so we shall start in that order. Mr. Mankhero, followed by Mochizi, and brother man over there. Cool. I don't know.
Sure, okay. So this thing is refused. Okay, yeah, thank you very much for the presentation and on the launch of the book. But mine is just a very straightforward question, because the book is on can you guys hear me? Okay, so I'm saying that I just wanted to understand, or maybe to hear Prof's thoughts on the post-colonial, the post-apartheid era, to say what extent is the nation still happening in South Africa, because he arrives from I mean, obviously, he's lived in both eras, so I just wanted to know his comments around the post-apartheid era. Thank you.
Greetings to everyone in the city. I'd like to start by making a comment to Prof. More that as he was expressing, I came to the realization that in actuality we are the first generation to not have to relate our being directly to the oppressor. By this I mean that during his times they had to relate as in they were in the cave, according to Plato's allegory of the cave, they existed in the cave, and going out of the cave meant the African philosophy, right? So we are really the first generation to ever not have to come out of the cave. We are out of the cave already, and it is actually our learning from the people who were in the cave that actually influences how we relate to the world. So I want to make this question that how then should we as the new age philosophers who don't have to relate to our invisible oppressor, how should we philosophize? What relationship should we have to our external world such that we can come up with a philosophy that does not have to limit us to only relating our being to oppressors, such that we can come up with solutions that are unique to us. We can look at the problem from our own perspective without first having to point to, oh, it's apartheid, this and this, it's apartheid, this and this, everything we point back to apartheid. So generally the question would be, how should we relate our being to the world such that we can have a unique view and not inherit the view of those who came out of the cave into the light, such that they came up with African philosophy?
Thank you. Thanks. My name is Khota Zompatlele. From the Department of Cultural and Political Studies. The first point I want to check with Prof. Is the idea of an attempt at maybe perhaps going beyond the limitations or perhaps the definitions of what Chabani Manganyi defines himself as, to say if we move away to say more than a psychologist, Chabani becomes a philosopher. So I move from the logic of Toni Morrison on arguing that perhaps definitions do not very often belong to those who are defined, but by those who have the power to define. So it's something perhaps we could look into in terms of giving a particular opinion on how do we complete the work of Chabani. But secondary to that, maybe I want to make a comment on being and negotiating existence as blacks, maybe from the examples that Prof has spoken of, maybe from the creative or the visual art space, to say, if we look at the works of Dumile Feni, if we look at the works of Gerald Sekoto, both are attempts at giving blackness a face in a world that continuously, disalienates or reduces blacks to what Tendai Tole perhaps argues on the black X, to say, so blackness is given a somewhat a dehumanization. So you are never anything, you are never black, you are never human. And to read that, to say, if we look at Gerald Sekoto and we look at the works of, if we look at the works of, I'm sorry, it's a white contemporary artist. I think it's right in contemporary with Gerald Sekoto. So Gerald Sekoto as a black artist is never seen as a contemporary leading artist in counter or comparison to his white counterparts. So how do we even, begin to want to find blackness in black aesthetic, which perhaps even to me goes on to extend the fact that the aesthetic that blacks produce either in sonic, either in visual. It's really an attempt at self-definition before assuming an existential position. So you never. Thank you.
But we are just running short of time, and I hope that they did catch some of your provocations. When I moved to Polokwane, I was told that in Seshego there is a school called Kaisho, where in Twina, like Gerard Sikoto was actually, I think, a teacher there with Dumile Feni. Yes, exactly. So I hope that, Prof, you were able to catch some of those questions. If you can, just to maybe respond to them, and we can have one last round of questions, just brief ones. Prof.
To the first question of post-colonialism. If we look at our history, South Africa was a colonial enclave. And apartheid was nothing but a perpetuation of the colonial structure. So that the post-colonial theories would suggest that colonialism is something of the past. The post, which means of the past. Now, I want to argue that we have what the Marxists in the early years called a colonialism of a special kind. And we're still under the colonial. There's no post about it. My view is, if apartheid is still there, if the land, 83% of the land is still owned by the former colonialists, then there is no way we can say we are in the post-colonial situation. We're still under the colonial, and we should address that seriously. So the post-colonial, scholarship seems to me to be addressing after independence. And anybody who reads The Wretched of the Earth will know that Fanon deals with that kind of post-independent Africa. And I've written a piece also on locating Fanon and the land question in South Africa. And I'm saying quite a lot of what is happening in Africa, and which is called post-colonial, is basically flag freedom rather than anything else. So that is with the post-colonial. The question of today's youth not related to apartheid and the constant use of apartheid by us old people presupposes that apartheid is dead. And I'm of the view that apartheid is not dead. And I've just articulated that as long as we still have the apartheid geography, for instance, where black people stay in particular areas, and only a few like us who have moved into certain areas, but we know we don't belong there because we are told and reminded all the time that we don't belong there. And as long as we have the Sowetos, as long as we have the Mlazis, as long as we have the Guguletus and the Davidtons, we're still in an apartheid geographical situation, and therefore I don't see how we can even begin to think that apartheid is gone. The very young people find themselves in an apartheid situation even now. So I'm not convinced that young people were born outside apartheid and therefore it doesn't affect them in one way or another. Okay. The question about psychologists Chabani Mangani, one of the greatest things about Chabani Mangani is that he was an avid reader of everything. He has written poems, he has written about architecture, he has written about psychology, he has written about philosophy, he has written about politics, he has written, he is one of the people that I would call does not engage in what we call disciplinary decadence. Now, a disciplinary decadence is somebody who believes that he's only a psychologist only, a psychologist only, and every other thing should be explained in terms of psychology. Now, he doesn't indulge in discipline. He transcends the boundaries of psychology and gets into other disciplines, and therefore, becomes a better intellectual than any psychologist who only sticks to psychological. Now, about art. Chabani Mangani, as the book suggests, the later Chabani Mangani, as the book suggests, believed that one of the forms of discrimination would come through artistic work. Now, artistic work for Chabani, not only sculpturing or drawings or whatever. It includes literature as well. So he believed that art can, in its form, it can contribute to the eventual discrimination of people, and it can be used as a tool towards discrimination. And he really believes in that. That's why he had to concentrate on Jumila Feni and Gerard Sekoto, but also go into literature and concentrate on Askia Pasele and others. So he believed seriously that art can in the transcendence of alienation.
Thank you very much, Prof.
I hope that we have.
Yeah, a lot of sense. I'd like to ask, are there any questions? Just the last three questions. Any more questions? Philosophy students, what have you learned about Mangani? Going once? Oh. Okay, they are going to buy the book. Please buy the book, comrades. Ntate Mboweni, did you have any questions, comment that you may like to make before we close? Okay. Okay. Can you please pass the mic to Mboweni, so that he gets to express that.
I wish that you could infuse all these views that were indicated today into your curriculum, the PA curriculum.
Thank you very much. Indeed, this is an attempt to foreground, philosophy as a discipline, to really rejuvenate, this rich intellectual heritage. Going back, I think there's an Akan, proverb saying, the Sankofa, like that we should go back and, fetch what we have forgotten. And this is part of us fulfilling that. So without any further ado, okay. No, I think this is really a nice proposal for us to engage more on Chabani Manganyi's work, and I hope that the initiative to have annual lectures in honor of this intellectual giant will be, a realizable dream that, will offer us an opportunity to engage in depth. Also, as I said, be on the lookout. Prof. More will be, hosted by the Department of Psychology, delving deeper into the psychological issues and Mangani. I would like to thank everyone, our guests online, Prof. More, for allowing us to have this book launch, to our partners, the HSRC, who are the publishers of this book. We are honored to have them in our presence, and to our respondent, Mr. Mjalela, to Sister Sarah Stlaelo. Thank you very much for agreeing. And thank you very much also to our comrades who are helping us with the technology. I think this wouldn't have been possible without their assistance. Thanks to everyone who made this possible.
Can I?
Yes, please, Prof.
Just the last word. Just the last word.
Great.
To the students, I know throughout experience that a lot of students think philosophy is that enigmatic, very difficult discipline, and it is a wrong conception of philosophy. If I could get a PhD in philosophy, then it means I'm not a genius. Philosophy can be, acquired by anybody, right? Who studies. So the advice that I gave to students normally is that it is not your aptitude, it is your attitude that will determine your aptitude. So that's important. It's the attitude only, nothing else. Philosophy is not difficult. Philosophy has done a great deal for me as a person, which I articulate in my memoirs. So it is indeed also a sexy subject. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Let's give Prof a round of applause. I have given my thanks, but there's someone officially to thank you, who has attended. When we attend funerals, they usually call, someone, the representative of the family, to thank the nation. This is that time. Sis Mapilo. Over to you.
Thank you, Program Director. Ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon. Thank you so much for hanging in there. Thank you so much for staying in till we reach the end of our program. I am going to give thanks and to also just give announcement as we are closing our conference. Please allow me to express our deepest gratitude to Professor Mokgalong in absentia. He joined us this morning. He opened the session for us, and when we see his office present at platforms like this, we know and we are assured that we are doing the right thing. It means that what we are doing is aligning with the goal of our institution. And in that note, also allow me to thank our Dean and our Director in absentia. We are able to host these platforms because they have endorsed and they are supporting us as well. In the 2 days of the conference that we have held, we had 2 keynote speakers. We had Prof. Malikani, we had Prof. Twala, and we learned so much from the experiences and their valuable contribution. Impa Prof. Twala Okarutla Khutla, you still have to answer the question that you left when you said you don't know or what should be done from here. So I think you owe us another round to come back and still give guidance on how do we forge forward from here. To our presenters, the valuable information, your groundbreaking work that you have shared with us, we have learned so much throughout the sessions, and we appreciate that you took your time and you sent in your abstracts and you came and you shared your experiences as we reflect as a nation in terms of where we are at and where we are going from here. Amongst us colleagues, allow me to express our thanks for the colleagues that we see amongst us. Prof. Mashirwani, the HOD of Psychology Department. Thank you, Prof, for taking your time and coming to join us. We have Ndate Mboweni, who's here. We know, Ndate Mboweni, when you are here, that what we are sharing would somehow find its way into our curriculum. So we have a chance of rewriting our history like we plan to do. So we are grateful for your presence. Of course, there are other colleagues that are here. If I did not mention you by name, please, it doesn't mean in any way that you are not valued. We appreciate your presence and we value your contribution in making this a success. Ladies and gentlemen, we had a very, very beautiful book launch. We appreciate Prof. Mori for choosing us to share this groundbreaking experience with us. We learned a lot about Noel Mangani, the psychologist, philosopher. We are now able to relate his work to where we are at and his contribution to where we are at as a nation, as young Black South Africans, and as well as knowing about the fact that he was one of the people who were at this university and his contribution to making our history or in contributing to the history that we have in South Africa. And in the midst of that, we also have our HSRC, who are the book producers. And also, we would like to also thank Sara Sklayelo, who was also a respondent to the book. We are so delighted and so fortunate to be part of this book launch. We know that from here, when we leave the hall, we are definitely going to purchase the book and we will get the answers that we are looking for from the book. And also, Babu Mjalela, siyabonga baba for the good response that you have shared with us. We now have a glimpse of what the book is about. We'll definitely go and get it from here. Ladies and gentlemen, the two departments that worked hand in hand in making sure that this is a success today, the Cultural and Political Studies, the Department of Sociology, the head of Department of Sociology and Anthropology was just here, but I think she stepped out. I think we owe them a hand of applause for making this possible. And of course, they worked together with a very good team, a task team that worked behind doors, looking at the abstracts. We had a task team that made sure that we had water delivered and all other logistics that makes the day possible. We also give thanks and we are grateful that you did give what you gave to ensure that this day is a success. And in specific, I would also like to thank Uba Budladla, or Butwam, as I always call you. We know that you are one of the brains that made sure that this is a success, or this initiate actually happens. And you heard what Prof. Morris says, that we are waiting for that professor title. The pressure is on. We are not even subtle about that. Yes, but thank you so much. Your work is not unnoticed. We know that the philosophy team is really making philosophy fashionable. We see your work, we are watching. The online audience that joined us from yesterday, and most importantly, the students that are here today and participated and asked questions and made sure that we had a lively conference that we had. We are grateful for the platform. And in the midst of that, we also appreciated the platform of having to see our lecturers in a different eye, isn't it? Usually in the class, we only get to experience them or have a one-way conversation where they are talking or kind of imparting knowledge to us, but to see them sitting here, both Dr. Vuma, bo Ms. Koko, responding to our question and sharing their knowledge on a different platform, that was very, very fruitful, and we truly appreciate you, colleagues. Now, we have come to the end of the announcement. I hope I have thanked everybody and really expressed our sincere gratitude for all the dedicate, for all the efforts that were put into making this conference a success. I believe that with this platform, we had a time to introspect and reflect on the journey of our nation since the dawn of democracy, but importantly, in trying to understand how we are going to redouble our efforts in pursuing a more just, inclusive, and a prosperous South Africa. But now, as we are closing, please note that next week we have another conference that the Department of Cultural and Political Studies is hosting. We have Abo Gapadia coming, we have the big dogs coming. So please join us on Wednesday the 15th. We will be hosting an international hybrid conference. The theme is Russia-Africa relations in a multipolar world, and we will be having Russia ambassadors here. We'll be having leading scholars who will be having discussions in relation to Russia-Africa relations. We'll be having colleagues from UNISA and other international scholars. So the very same effort and energy we brought to this conference, let us bring it again next week, Wednesday, until we meet again. Now, for our refreshments and lunch, students, please let's remain seated. Our food will be delivered here, and then our colleagues and our guests, we can now head to staff cafeteria to enjoy our lunch. I thank you.
As instructed, can we please ask, the staff members to proceed to the staff cafeteria. Also, I think for those that were presenting on the conference, there's communication for further workshopping of your contributions. There is an edited volume that will come as a result of the contributions that you have. So please be on the lookout. Please do check your emails. Until we see each other next week, asibonge.